Hi everyone, good afternoon. I'm grateful to have some time and space to be with you today. And I'm Dr. Pavini Moray. If we haven't met, I'm the founder of Wilcelium. And Wilcelium is a trans and queer-led online learning community where we're teaching adults who long for healthy connection, the skills for a relationship, the skills for love that can stand the test of time. And on the first Thursday of every month, we offer a free teaching, some relevant topic about sex and intimacy and relationships. And today we're talking about conflict, and we're covering how you can be the person that you want to be during conflict. Practices that will help your conflict be transformative instead of harmful. And there's going to be lots of time for Q&A, so I really hope that you stick around to the end. This is a participatory teaching, and I'm actively inviting in your participation, I'll be asking questions and inviting you to answer in the chat. And as you do that, it just builds my connection with you and our connection as a learning community together, to know that other people are in the same place that we are, right? I do invite you to give yourself the gift of your own attention. We're going to be together for about 60 minutes. And so, a gentle invitation, close your other browsers, turn off your cell phone, or at least turn it over, and just show up and be present. This is a gift that you can give yourself. And I want to be clear that this, I'll be using the word like partner or person a lot. And this refers to anybody in your life with whom you have conflict, friendships, family, co-workers, lovers, really for all relationships, because all relationships eventually have conflict. Also, just on a housekeeping note, everything that I share today is grounded in my personal learning and experience of relationship, of conscious relationship, of being a person who has conflict. And it's all shared with just an attitude of a lot of love and a lot of compassion, no judgment, for just the experience of being human and relating with other humans and trying to be close and trying to be loving. So just, if anything shows up for you, if anything grabs you, just knowing that that's my intention, is compassion with this teaching today. So let's talk a little bit about conflict first. For many people, coming to this idea, this concept that conflict can be a tool of transformation, it can be useful, it can be healthy, is a new paradigm, right? That there's a lot of baggage around conflict, and rightly so, because most of us aren't very skillful with it, and we create a lot of flailing and thrashing and hurting and when we do it, right? But so coming to this concept that conflict can actually be really helpful. So this is the first part of the participation. When you were growing up, did you see conflict in your family? Was it something that was done in public, or was it done in private? And so if you would just answer that in the chat, that would be helpful. So how did you first experience conflict, publicly, or was it done behind closed doors? Great. So I'm seeing things like unspoken tension, behind closed doors, whispered but obvious, very public screaming, loud external conflict, and also passive aggressive. Yeah. And In your experience of witnessing conflict as a young person growing up, did you see it modeled as aggressive, competitive, harmful, or was it modeled with grace, care, responsibility? So you can just type that into the chat if it was either aggressive or with a lot of care. Aggressive, intimidation. And if you happen to be somebody who saw it modeled with care, speak up. Aggressive, punishing, harmful. Lots of aggression, violence. Good. It was not handled below the surface. Yeah, totally. One last question about this. Did you see repair modeled, or was it, did it just kind of, people got tired of fighting, it got swept under the rug until the next conflict? Or did you see a process where skillful adults acknowledged their part, made apologies, made repair with each other? So you can either write saw repair or didn't see repair. Saw repair, good. Sometimes my mom would apologize. My dad never seems to apologize. Good. I'm asking these questions because, of course, our conflict skills are based in what we observed in our environment, right? And most of you indicated that the conflict that you observed, it wasn't particularly skillful. We haven't had great role models for that. And so coming to this concept of like, oh, conflict is a good thing, right, is going to be hard, right? It's hard to hold on to that paradigm when there's all this stuff around it and negative and painful experiences around it. So just wanting to be super compassionate there and offer that this is a process of coming to embrace conflict as a tool of transformation. It is both a creative force and a destructive force, depending on how it's used, right? I think the purpose of it is that it really points at what is not working. So many conflicts take place below the surface, right? And in those realms that are hidden maybe from our conscious awareness, or the realms that we're not yet willing to speak about. So it could be our emotions, what's important to us, our longings, our resentments, our memories, our self-image, right? That there's this pool that's happening underneath. And so often when we're conflicting, there's the thing that's on the surface that we're conflicting about. And then there's all this stuff that's under the surface that's not either in our awareness or not being said yet, right? At its most superficial definition. So conflict requires at least two parties. It requires a disagreement or a dispute over some issue that it's where you're able to take opposing sides. And there's a presence of negative emotions, right? So three things, at least two people or two parties, disagreement, and negative emotion. And then often there are negative behaviors that follow the negative emotions. So that can be an antagonistic spirit, intolerant goal, attachment to being in conflict, close-heartedness, bitterness, competition, adversarial nature, right? Those things can all be part of the recipe for conflict. Somatically, right? So in your body, what's happening during conflict? It's I said that it's necessary to have some kind of negative emotion, some degree of negative affect. And so it's hard to be in conflict without being triggered or grabbed in some way. So emotions are often heightened, as are sensations, the somatic strategies of fight, flight, freeze, appease, right? And so that's all happening. So there's also, right? So there's the content of what's being batted about between the two parties. And then there's all the body stuff that's happening. Often, and I don't know if this is true for you, but it's certainly true for me, one of the first things that happens during conflict is that sense of being grabbed, that sense of being triggered. Things start to feel like they're going faster. They speed up, and that can really create this loss of access to feeling your own self, feeling your three-dimensionality, feeling your embodiment, right? To the felt sense of being grounded in your body. That sensation can become overwhelming. And then there's an automatic response to either move towards it, to move against it, or to move away from it, right? And so these are the somatic survival responses, right? Of fight, flight, appease. And then the freeze response can be, I'm sure you all have had this experience and you know it intimately, but it can be where it's just that loss of sense of any agency, of really being able to be able to think and to connect at all, right? Of just like this sense of maybe terror. These responses, of course, are our lizard brains, right? Of how our lizard brains interpret stress, interpret threats. That there is these qualities of what's happening on the body level, and we become often just really unaware of our own bodies. And I say this because the corrective is, how do I practice embodiment during conflict? We'll talk a little bit about that later. When you lose access to your feeling self, to your grounded self, when things feel like they're going really fast and you're grabbed, you also lose access to choice, right? Or it can feel that way. And then you start acting from habituation, from your habits, from the patterns that you've seen modeled, from your early patterning, from your survival strategies. You start to do things and say things. You start to follow impulses. And this is what I mean when I'm saying lack of access to choice, right? It doesn't feel like you have a choice in that moment, or it can be like that. The paradigm between you, the relationship at that moment, right? When you don't have choice anymore, when you've lost access to your embodiment, it stops being collaborative and it starts being competitive. It starts being, there's a winner and there's a loser, and people are struggling for power, right? Or vying to be right. And when we're in that space, when we're trying to assert our right to exist, because it feels threatened, we are losing access to our humanity, right? And for me, when I lose access to my humanity, when I stop being able to do all those things, feel all those things, it's super easy for whoever I'm in conflict with to immediately become other. This othering happens. The person who I'm in this bubble of conflict with becomes competitive, becomes the enemy. They're out to get me, right? There's an opponent that I have to fight with, or struggle with, or appease, or collapse. There's this other, like, we're no longer, oh, here's our hearts open in relationship and we just hit a bump where I feel one way and you feel another way. There's this tension that's between us now in the space, right? And that othering is when you lose access to your ability to really feel their humanity. Right? Your heart's not open to them, to what they might be feeling. You are very, we get very guarded, we get very armored. And sometimes in that moment of the conflict, there's this descent into despair that might happen, right? Of like, it's hopeless, like here we are again, this is what we always do, this situation is never gonna change, we'll never be free of this, I'm doomed, right? In all of that, there is this assumption that the future is set, that there's no flexibility, there's no collaboration that's ever gonna happen again, right? Even if we've been through this 100 times, it can still feel like that in the moment. And without those flexible choices, without access to that, yeah, the only thing that's left is those are those reactive patterns that you've adopted, right? And then there's the part where it feels unbearable inside, right? That internal set of emotions and sensations, it just feels like something, I cannot bear this anymore, this storm of sensation and emotion that's coursing through me. And then we start to get impulses like lashing out, name calling, eye rolling, throwing things, running away, trying to inflict pain on the other person, violent impulses, aggressive impulses, right? And because there is something inside that's grasping for something to do in this moment that feels untenable. And those impulses themselves, right? If you've ever had a violent impulse, like I'm sure you have, they can feel scary too. They can also feel really justified in the moment. They can feel like this is the only option I have to reassert selfhood and regain control, right? And get out of this morass of terribleness that I'm experiencing right now. So if you can call up a time in your memory when you have felt, let's take an aggressive impulse. You've wanted to lash out, you wanted to say something mean, you wanted to throw something, you wanted to hit somebody, or like you know, slam your fists down, or you puff your chest up, any of that aggressive stuff. So just call with lots of compassion a moment when you've had that impulse. And you've actually followed it through. You've actually done the thing. You slammed that fist, you threw that plate, maybe you even punched that person. Just calling to mind that. Because what I'm curious about is, did it actually resolve the conflict? Or did it give a brief relief and then a bigger mess that you had to clean up later? So did it resolve the conflict, yes or no? And if you would just type that into the chat, that would be great. No, never. No, created a bigger mess to clean up later. Never does. Yeah, no. Momentary illusionary power. Good, yeah. So those impulses that feel so correct, like this is my only path forward, right? And you know to question, like whenever there's only one path forward, you know you're in trauma land, right? We're not in a resourced place. You follow this impulse, it doesn't work out. And then how do you feel about yourself once that conflict is over? What has been your experience of after you've followed an impulse like that? How have you felt about yourself? You can type that in. Deep shame and confusion, immense guilt, defensive and shitty and scared, shame, guilt, shame, depression. Yeah. That sucks, right? It's like the thing that you thought was gonna like be this breakthrough thing. You just had to do it and you do it and then you just feel so bad about yourself, right? So we can look at that and we can just look at, okay, you know, what have I learned from that? Well, I've learned that when I feel like I don't have choice, when I lose access to my humanity, when I lose access to someone else's humanity, when I do something out of that space, when I act or say something, right? It doesn't really work out and it actually makes it worse. So, all right, maybe it's time to try a different approach, right? Deciding how you would like to feel when you're in conflict is really the first step in deciding who you want to practice being in conflict, right? So when you're not triggered, when you're not in conflict, you say, okay, this is who I want to be in conflict, right? You make a commitment to that vision. So for me, for example, during conflict, I want to feel embodied. I want to honor my own humanity, and I want to honor the humanity of my sparring partner. That's exactly how I want to feel when I'm in conflict, right? Because I have realized, as I'm sure have you, that just because I'm triggered, it's not a free pass for acting however you want, right? It doesn't justify it later. Later, I feel really bad about myself, and I don't want to do that. That's not loving towards me, right? And so, as you love yourself more and more, as you grow in your healing and in that self-love, what you start to realize is that when you do harm to others, when you slam down that fist or throw that plate or hit that person, right, that you're actually doing harm to yourself. And this is really important. When I do harm to others, I'm actually harming myself, right? When I act out of alignment, I'm not in alignment with my own integrity. When you cross your own boundaries, when you name call, when you lash out, when you retaliate, when you roll your eyes, you start to feel the grit of that at some point. You start to feel that the hurt that it does to your own relationship with yourself, right? I can't trust myself. I do these shitty things, I get really down on myself about it. And so learning to fight fair is about developing strong respect for yourself and your own humanity. And that's the why of it. That's why you do it, right? Because it's like, sure, you want to show up well in your relationships and you want to be a good friend or child or partner or coworker, right? You want to do that. And this is really about your relationship with yourself, right? Because you cannot cut someone down without being someone who cuts people down. You can't be someone who retaliates without being someone who causes other people pain on purpose, right? And who wants to do that? Like, that's yucky. I don't want to be that person. You don't want to be that person, I'm sure, right? And it's my sense, at least for me, this is true, that when I was young, I didn't get this. I thought I could just act with impunity, right? And I didn't get it that if I was mean or aggressive, that I was actually practicing that part of me that was mean and aggressive. I was like strengthening it, right? And the more that I acted in that way, the less I loved myself. The more I saw myself be shitty in conflict, it was really humbling, right? It is humbling to realize of like, oh, I don't want to be like that, right? Because you can only apologize for bad behavior so many times before you're like, oh shit, I am an abusive asshole, right? I'm not changing my behavior. And so at some point when we have healed enough to actually feel the impact that we cause with those behaviors during conflict, you start to not like that feeling. And you start to not like feeling like a mean person. You don't like how it feels when you lash out. You don't like the shame backlash after. And you don't like it enough that you're willing to try something else, right? That you can practice having more choice in the heat of the moment. I do believe that non-harmful conflict is a thing, that you can learn to go slow enough. You can learn to take breaks. You can learn to refrain from doing and saying things from those triggered places where you're just trying to get relief, right? And compassion for just trying to get relief, right? And I think the thing that's important is it doesn't mean getting good at conflict doesn't mean that it's pain-free, right? It hurts. It hurts to be in these tense places with the people that we care about. We would all, I think, mostly prefer that there's an ease and a flow, right, of love and connection between us. And so when we're in conflict, it hurts. The thing is that I said that conflict is valuable, and I stand by that, that it's immensely important, because sometimes there's things, there are truths that either we don't want to see ourselves, right? Or we don't want to share with people because we're worried about the impact on them, right? Like something that's deeply true for you. I don't want to sleep in the same bed with you anymore. I want to shift from being lovers to being just friends, right? Like those kinds of things of actually, I don't want to have this job anymore. I don't want you to be my boss anymore. I don't like it. These kinds of truths that we either hide from ourselves or we hide from the people that we care about. And conflict can be that place where it's impossible to not say those truths, right? And so hearing those truths can create ouch, right? It's not harm, it's just pain, right? And those truths can cause pain, which is why, and we knew that on some level, so we weren't saying it. But hurting and harming are different, right? It is not possible to be in relationship with anybody and never feel hurt and to never cause hurt. It's just not possible. Like we step on people's toes all the time by accident. They step on our toes, right? It is quite possible to be in relationship and never cause intentional harm, right? So getting good at conflict doesn't mean that we're not going to hurt and be hurt. It just means that we become really responsible because it's a gift and a loving act towards ourselves, right? So with some I'm gonna tell you a story about a time I caused harm on purpose intentionally, and I'm gonna invite you to think of a time that you did this too. That like that internal somatic morass was too great for you to bear, and then maybe you did something out of that. You said something, or you did something. You closed off your heart in some way. You caused harm on purpose to get out of that feeling, right? So my example is when I was in college, I had a partner. Her name was Kelly, and we were living together. And oh God, we had terrible fights. And we're just young and unskillful, and messed up. And she loved The Cure, the band The Cure, and she had like all of their albums on vinyl. And we got in a fight one time, and she left, and I was so angry. And I broke one of her Cure albums into many pieces, and I shoved it back into the vinyl record sleeve and put it back in the record collection. I thought to myself, like, oh, when she finds that, she'll just feel how terrible I feel right now, right? And of course, once you've broken something like that, you can't put it back together, right? So even when I came back down from the trigger, the thing was still broken, and then I had to admit it. So just call to mind some time when you have caused harm intentionally, even if it was just a little thing. You don't have to type it into the chat. Just knowing that moment. If there's some shame that comes up, just be kind with that. Because I want to talk a little bit about retaliation. So it's my sense that retaliation, of like when we do something out of our own hurt, it's a attempt to regain ground. We're just trying to get our ground back. It's a less than skillful practice. It's trying to take what is here, what is inside, and project it at someone else, right? Like I took all of that pain, and I just like took it out on Kelly's album, knowing that it would hurt her, right? And I have compassion for that experience. I have compassion for things being too much sometimes to bear. And when we seek revenge, right? When you try to get back at someone, just this gentle inquiry about like, what does it cost me? Like, what did it cost me to do that? Sure, in the moment, it felt like I felt powerful and I felt like I was in control. But then, it had impact on my relationship was the cost. It had impact on my self-esteem. It had impact on Kelly's trust for me. It had impact on my trust for myself. And yeah, like just sitting with that, with the truth of like, oh, I am somebody who did that. it's painful, right? It's painful. And it's also painful to be the recipient of that, right? And I'm sure if I asked you to call to mind a time that someone retaliated against you, right? Like workplace retaliation is common, right? Retaliation in families is common. It's painful, and it's my sense that that revenge attempt, that retaliation attempt, what we're trying to do also, we're trying to get ground, we're trying to get power, but we're also trying to not feel the grief that comes from being hurt, right? That others can either unintentionally or intentionally cause you pain. It's a deep reminder of your own vulnerability, that you have a heart that can be hurt, you have feelings that can be hurt, right? That groundlessness, uncertainty are really what's at the center of each of our lives. And yeah, I mean, fuck that, right? I'm being facetious because I think that it's super understandable to think how wonderful if I could just never be hurt again, right? And if that doesn't work, well, at least I can hurt them back if they've hurt me, right? Here's the thing: I think we have to be able to be with our own hurts. It's funny to say that this is a relationship conflict skill, but I think it really is, of being able to be with our own hurting, be able to feel our own suffering, our own pain, our own grief, without making it worse by doing something that's going to, cause someone else pain or be a mess we have to clean up. And this is something that's deeply selfish, right? We're doing this for ourselves. We can interrupt layering suffering upon our suffering. We don't need to do that, right? And this is a cycle that you can break. And it does mean learning to feel your feelings, be with your grief, be with your pain, without taking action. This is the refraining part. It means being a friend to yourself, a sweet and a kind friend who will hold you when you're hurting rather than be mean to you, right? And so this is what I mean when I say you get to be who you want to be in conflict. I get to be someone who is gentle with my hurts. I get to be someone who takes care, who doesn't make further messes that cause me shame and humiliation, that doesn't break the relationship. And if you are familiar with the work of Resma Menakem, right, he talks about the difference between clean pain and dirty pain, right? And this idea of like, I can be with my clean pain, I can cause clean pain and be accountable for it, and I can choose not to cause dirty pain, right? And so when these impulses of aggression, for example, or an impulse of flight, when they come on, and you just sit with them without repressing it, right? You're not smushing it down, you're not acting on it. There's some middle ground there. You're just refraining from acting out of that place. There's some kind of freedom, I think, there. I mean, at least it feels like that. It's when you're refraining from acting from impulse and refraining from acting from habit or patterning of your family of origin, when you like, choice becomes possible. And this is a thing that we train, right? We build capacity for it over time. It's a warrior's training, really, this kind of discernment. In the short term, when you're in the midst of feeling that mess, it's way worse, right? It's way more difficult to be like, I am hurting, I am brokenhearted, I am angry, I am afraid. That's what it is, right? It's so much harder to be with that in the short term. In the long term, this way of training becomes it's much easier to train this way, right? If we can learn in the short term to sit with what we're feeling and not act or speak out of that place, it's just long term, then it becomes easier for us. We see the course of our lives as, oh, I'm somebody who in conflict, even in the midst of all of that, everything, I'm with myself. I'm present with myself. I'm connected to my humanity. I can feel proud of that. I can feel ground in that. I can feel love in that, right? Because of really choosing to remain connected to your own humanity, as well as the humanity of your sparring partner. This is this different world that I think, hope you want to be in with me. I want to be in this world, right? Where, we're in disagreement and maybe we're triggered AF, but we're still human with each other. We're not othering. We're not dismissing or banishing or canceling. We're just like, this hurts, I, for a couple of years, trained in Aikido. So I'm not a master of that craft in any way, but I learned a lot about conflict in that training, because in sparring with your opponent, that fundamental respect for their humanity is always present, right? And so they're giving you, when they come in with their attack, they're giving you this opportunity to practice your skill. And instead of viewing them as the enemy, as the other, they're a training partner, a teacher, a friend, right? That's giving you this opportunity. It's a generosity of spirit. And so you take that energy and you transform that attacking energy. And at the same time, you remain connected to them. You never, this is the practice, right? You never dismiss their humanity. You're never like, oh yeah, fucker, I'm going to take you down now and break your face, right? You're realizing that the human in front of you also wants the same exact things that you want. They want dignity, they want connection, they want belonging. And so take a moment here to call to mind some conflict that you've been in some recent time. And just take a moment to get connected with when you were in the midst of it. All of everything that was coming out. And seeing the other person, whether they were in person with you or not in person with you, just seeing them in that same space. And as you're in your mind's eye, as you're feeling the trigger of the conflict, see if you can connect with just that desire to be in your dignity, to be in your humanity. And just take a moment there to really feel that. And then once you have that, see if you can, whatever you have to do, Jedi, your own perspective to see that that other person with whom you are in conflict also wants to be in their dignity and their humanity. And just see if you can feel that sameness of like, oh, we both have a similar goal. And just see what you notice when you hold, I want to be in my humanity. We're in conflict. You want to be in your humanity. We're in conflict. What becomes available in this practice? What do you notice? And you can type it into the chat if you want. And maybe some of you are having a hard time with this practice, even on the imaginal level, right? Of holding me in my dignity, my humanity, the conflict, and then you in yours, right? And how do we hold all of that? Do you notice things that people have as they do this? Dignity is not a zero-sum game. Yeah. Lots of fear coming up. Slowing down helps. Feels like hope. Yeah. I think it's cool to train, even when the other person isn't present, right? Like, how do I train to hold this? How do I train to hold that they're a teaching partner, they're a training partner? Like, and then this is what opens, for me, it's what opens into, even as this conflict exists, I am not here to take you down. I am careful of you. I am careful of your desire for dignity and connection and belonging, just as I'm careful of my own, right? And fighting with this kind of framework, it doesn't mean that you don't have boundaries, right? Like, it doesn't mean like, oh, I'm just going to be so compassionate for my partner that it's like, fine, whatever, you know, it's not like that. You get to have boundaries. You get to have what's okay for you right now and what's not okay for you right now. And that can always change, right? And this also doesn't mean that you have to transcend emotion. You don't have to be the Buddha to do this practice. Now, this practice is messy and it's hard. You are never probably going to get it perfect. I know I never have gotten it perfect, right? But that fundamental thing of like, I always have respect for my own humanity and I always have respect from your humanity. There's actually nothing you can do that's going to change that. You cannot provoke me out of that, right? That's what I'm training in. That's that deep, I am training in who I want to be in conflict. And that is the thing of like, I will not dismiss my humanity or yours, no matter what happens. I won't do it, right? You know, because even in the greatest love, conflict isn't going away. We are always going to have conflict. There are always going to be moments where we're like, oh, I don't want to do that, or I don't like that, or, you know, this is going to come up. Disagreement, hurt, raised emotions, that's always going to be present. And part of deciding who you are in conflict is deciding who you are after conflict, because conflict isn't necessarily finite, right? I think like 69% of conflict is unresolvable. And it's just there as like pointing back towards like integrity, right? And so who you want to be after conflict is also part of this question. Like, who do I want to be after, you know? And sometimes a conflict is so painful or so irresolvable that you can't reconcile, right? You can't go back to the way you were before. You can't go back to relationship. And that's okay. It's totally okay. You do get to have boundaries. Sometimes it's time to part ways with someone, right? And so what I'm saying isn't to try and like tell you that like, now resolve your conflicts and that's always reconciliation. Like, because if conflict is truly a tool of transformation, sometimes that transformation means a big relationship change, right? Sometimes it means moving out of contact for a while or forever. This is especially true with people who aren't willing to do the work of examining their contribution to the conflict. I'm going to say a little bit more about this. As I said, conflict always involves two parties, a disagreement, and raised emotions. And that means that any conflict is always a co-created experience, right? Nobody's ever to blame for the fact that there's conflict, right? If you want to be in this paradigm of holding conflict as an agent of change, one of the most important things you can do as a practice is to, as soon as possible, as soon as you are like some degree not triggered, maybe all the degrees not triggered, is to quickly examine your own contributions and be willing to name them to the other person. This is the opposite of blame. And this practice really involves only you, where you just show up and you say, you know what, in that conflict, like I raised my voice at you, or I slammed down my hand. I acknowledge that I did that. I puffed up my chest. I had an aggressive impulse and I followed that impulse, right? And you acknowledge your part, your contribution. Or you can acknowledge what you did in the actual conflict or the preceding events. Like in that conflict, you had told me 3 times that this was important to you and I had disregarded it. I acknowledge that, right? And again, this is a selfish practice, right? You're not doing it for the other person. You're doing this for you, of like really naming like, oh, I did this, right? I'm not going to drown myself in shame. I'm just going to say, yep, I did that. I had this 8-year-old student named Mark when I was a teacher, and I would say, Mark, did you blah blah blah? And he would just say, yep, I did that. And I just learned so much from that, right? We can just acknowledge our contributions without expectation that the other person is going to acknowledge theirs. Maybe they have that capacity. Awesome if they do. I'm imagining that you're picking partners and friends who are at your similar skill level with this stuff, right? You can definitely build that into relationship agreements of like, hey, when we fight, we're going to come back and acknowledge our contributions, right? But some people don't have that capacity, don't want that capacity, aren't interested in that, right? And how you are in conflict is not dependent. Who you are in conflict is not dependent on what someone else does, right? This is you kind of like putting your stake in the sand, mixed metaphor, and saying, this is who I am. This is what's important to me. I acknowledge my contributions, right? And then you remain open to repair with the other party. And sometimes people are willing, sometimes they're not. Sometimes it takes a while for them to get to that point in their process where they're willing to repair. But your commitment to repair is not based on anything that they're doing, right? Your commitment to repair, it means that any residual aggression, any lingering like rightness or blame, you process that, either with friends or therapists or just internally journaling, whatever you do, you take care of that. You anything that's left in your heart. Why? Why do you do this? Right? Because your heart is so precious. Your heart is so precious. And you don't deserve to have unresolved aggression, unresolved stuff riding around with you, So you get accountable. You get accountable for the mistakes you made, the places that you dropped the commitment you want to be, right? Because nobody's ever going to be perfect. This is not a perfection process. When you step out of that commitment to who you want to be and you're like, you acknowledge it, like, oh man, I didn't want to eye roll and I eye rolled, right? You just step back. You just step back to your commitment, right? It's not like, now I failed and I'm never going to get good at this. It's just like, I fucked up and now I'm going to come back to the commitment and try again, you don't need to allow anything that's like toxic to linger in your heart. If it's not helping you, figure out how to let it go or how to process it out or do what you need to do to get resolution, because the state of your heart, your very own heart, is so important. So yeah, I just this last invitation into dropping something in the chat of, and I imagine that you'll continue to sit with these concepts and topics. And also I'm going to send you a beautiful PDF that we made where you can work through it as a worksheet if that's your jam. But what I'd like to invite you to drop in the chat right now, and again, it's super helpful to have community witness. What are the broad strokes of, like, when you hear this, who do I want to be in conflict? Who do I want to show up as? What are some of the things that light up for you? Who do you want to be? Let me read these. I want to increase my capacity to hear my partner's pain as a request to be seen and understood. I want to bring love and understanding to all situations and have the goal of stronger relationships as a North Star. I want to be someone who is still compassionate and able to apologize without feeling obliterated. I want to be able to accept that I'm not always right and feel their side also. They're beautiful. Yeah, and you get to be the person who practices those things, right? We're gonna take some Q&A in here in just a little bit. Just a announcement that we do have free First Thursday teachings, and our next one is Thursday, July 1st. And it's on why your erotic confidence matters, overcoming shame. And whenever we teach about shame, no one wants to show up and talk about shame. And it's so important to talk about shame, right? Because that's how we get out of the stranglehold of it, is to talk about it. So I hope that you will join us for that next teaching. Because erotic confidence is, I mean, obviously it's where our school is centered, right? It's around the erotic and relationships, but like it's the same as confidence. Like, why does your confidence matter? And when I say that, it's why does trusting yourself matter? Why does trusting, go back to what we just talked about, right? Why does trusting that I can show up in conflict and trust myself, right? I trust myself to show up in conflict. I trust myself that even as things speed up, I'm going to slow down. I'm going to take breaks because I practice all the time, and so it builds confidence when you trust yourself. So anyway, we're talking about erotic confidence and getting out of the stranglehold of any kind of shame around sex and sexuality. So I hope that you'll come to that Thursday, July 1st. And I have a request for you. So we do these teachings for free. There's never a charge for them, and we do it as a way to make this content really accessible to folks who want it and need it. However, there's a lot that goes into them on the back end, right? There's all of the preparation, all of my preparation to create them. There's all of what the team is doing to make the graphics and the web pages and send out the PDFs and the emails and all this stuff. So there's a lot that goes into them. So they're free for you, but they're not free for us. And this is about relationship, right? You and I are in relationship with each other. And so if there's something that you have gotten that's been really helpful from this teaching, my request is, would you tell somebody? Would you just tell somebody today, like, wow, I went to this webinar. I spent an hour of my life learning about who I want to be in conflict, and it was with Wilcilium, and they're awesome. And, just spread the word. That's what you can do on your end to make sure that we can keep going. It's really helpful. It really matters to us as a small company. So, all right. All that said, we're going to spend the next few minutes together with Q&A. And I saw that there's already one question, which I'm going to answer, but go ahead and type your questions either into the chat or the Q&A, and I'll do my best. All right. What can we do when our sparring partner uses rhetoric and subtle psychological tactics, such as gaslighting, manipulation, etc.? Things that aren't obviously physically noticeable, like breaking things or raising one's voice. This is a great question. I mean, my practice is naming what is. And with those subtle strategies, right? Because everybody's just trying to find control, trying to find ground in a groundless, uncertain world. And so when I hear that your sparring partner is using those things, I have compassion that those are things that they got modeled. This is what works in conflict, so do this, right? This is what our family does. And the practice then just becomes internally in you, in naming it to yourself, of like, oh, I see the gaslighting, I see the manipulation, and you don't have to be gaslit or manipulated, that this is a place where you start to just name internally with kindness what you're seeing. And it doesn't mean that you have to engage it, right? You can make deliberate choices about what you engage and what you don't. And so, for example, like with gaslighting, I can imagine an example where someone's like, that never happens. And then you're in this conversation about reality, right? Like, how is this helpful? It's not, right? So you can, in your inside mind and self, say, well, they have experienced a different reality than I experienced. This is my reality, right? And I'm not going to fight with them about that. I don't need to defend my reality, right? I mean, and I think what could also be helpful is if this is a person who you're close with and in conflict with some degree of regularity, when you're not in conflict, to either get mediation and talk about it, or like, hey, I experienced this, and I just wonder if you're noticing it, or, you know, what do you notice about this? And to talk about it in a really non-confrontational way of like, hey, this shows up when we're in conflict. What's your experience? What is your take on it? And are you interested in working on that? Do you want me to name it to you when I experience it? Would that be helpful? Would you prefer to hear about it after? You know, and if it's something you care about, like hopefully they are invested in their own self-growth and may not even be aware of it, right? And so it might be that you are their training teacher, right, to help point it out to them, but they might not be aware of it. So hope that's helpful. Okay. When I apologize, I get scared of being dumped with all the responsibility and the cause of all the problems. What to do to share responsibility? Sometimes my partner apologizes with laced blame, so everything still leads back to me. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think my first question is, have you named that? Same about the gaslighting. Have you named that experience to them? You know, have you talked kind of on that meta level about this? Of, hey, I noticed when I apologized to you, I'm really afraid that I'm going to get handed a bunch of blame. And I am so willing to show up and be accountable for my part, but sometimes I get the hit that maybe you want me to take more than my part, and can we talk about that? You know, again, this naming what your experience is. And I know what you're talking about apologies that are kind of, I mean, first of all, I just want to say that, like, I think we need to do a whole webinar on how to do a good apology, right? It's such a sorely needed skill. And when your partner says they're sorry, and yet there's still blame, I think you can name that. If like, okay, I hear you saying that you're sorry, and I also have this experience of like, you're wanting me to take this piece on. Is there something else that you're needing acknowledged? You know, because I would like to just have the apology, and I'm totally willing to acknowledge my part if I feel like it's mine. And, you know, people are going to throw all kinds of stuff at us, right? And want us to take responsibility for it. And we have to get good at discerning of like, what do I really feel right in my dignity about saying, yeah, I did that. Yeah, I can see that. I didn't know it when I was doing it, but now that you mentioned it, I can see it. Or like, oh, I hear that you really want me to be responsible for that. And I just, when I drop in my heart, like, I don't feel that. You know, is there some hurt of yours? Is there some hurt that's not being acknowledged here, that's trying to show up and have this blame thing take care of it, right? But just asking more directly. So yeah, relationships are so tricky, aren't they? But I do just want to really, again, just invite you into this paradigm of like, these can be our greatest teachers. They can be the places that we're really doing the training to be the people, to be the warriors that we want to be, warriors of love in our hearts that we want to be. So thank you so much for your attention and your time and your engagement and your dropping things in the chat and your like really wrestling. This was a, I think, turning the attention back to ourselves of like, like, oh, my conflict actually depends on how I am, it's a big deal. You know, it's a big deal thing to do. It's a brave thing to do. So thank you for that. And I hope to see you next month. And until then, I'm Dr. Pavini Moray for Wilcelium, and just wishing you so much ease and breath and joy. I'll see you soon. Bye, everyone.